Welcome back. All right, so I wanted to do another video today where we discuss the standings. I wanted to discuss last year's, wanted to point some stuff out, and then I wanted to talk about this upcoming season and expectations and where they're at and everything. So let's go ahead and start off. We'll look at the Atlantic, then the Metro, then the Central, then the Pacific. So looking at the Atlantic this past season, Toronto, 108 points. For Tampa, 102 points. Florida, 98 points. Ottawa 97, Montreal 91, Detroit 86, Buffalo 79, and Boston 76. At one point, the Montreal Canadiens looked like their season was done, that they weren't going to make it, and then they went on a nice strong run, and they did make it. The 91 points is where it's kind of interesting to me because normally it requires more points than that to make the playoffs. The expectations in Montreal are up. We'll talk about that as well. But what this also points out is, so you've got Florida 10 points behind Toronto. That's only 5 wins over an 82-game schedule. The difference between these teams, I don't think is as dramatic as it may look, at least during the regular season. For instance, Ottawa only being 1 point behind the Florida Panthers, and then the playoffs roll around, and Florida is, on their way to another Stanley Cup, right, this past spring. So looking at the numbers, you can see why from one year to the next things can vary. Teams go on losing streaks, winning streaks. You get injuries, things of this nature, and it's going to make a difference. So when I was trying to figure out who's going to finish in or out of the playoffs, I kind of had to keep it simple and just keep in mind that my projections are if everybody's healthy. So we'll go over to the Metro, which is widely seen as a weak division. And the Atlantic scene is being pretty strong. So the Metro, you have Washington with 111 points, 12 more than Carolina's 99. New Jersey 91, Columbus 89. So Columbus was only 1 win away from the playoffs, right? 3 points away from clearing New Jersey and making it into the playoffs. 3 points away from clearing Montreal as well. So over an 82-game schedule, that's nothing. It really is. So one thing, and I've talked about this, that we know is because Montreal had 91, Columbus had 89, the expectations this year are higher for Montreal than they are for Columbus, even though you can make an argument for Columbus to be a playoff team over Montreal. Then you got the Rangers with 85, the Islanders with 82, Pittsburgh with 80, and Philadelphia with 76. Now, the Rangers are expected to have a bit of a bounce-back season. They only finished 6 points out of the playoffs. So it's not that far out of a playoff position. And you can see how the East could get really kind of messy. But we'll talk about that when I get to this side of the board and what the expectations are going forward, which is one of my favorite things about this time of year. Honestly, middle of September, everybody's excited about their team. Everybody's excited about the season. And then a month down the road, when we're, a week and a half into the regular season, by then there's somebody panicking. And there's a team we didn't expect to start out well, starting off really well. So go out west, the Central. Winnipeg had 116 points. They won the President's Trophy with that total. 5 points ahead of Washington, 8 points ahead of Toronto, and 6 points ahead of Vegas in terms of the other division winners. So not that much ahead of these other teams when you consider 6 points, that's 3 wins between themselves and Vegas. 5 points, that's 2.5 wins between themselves and the Washington Capitals. And even Toronto here, who had the lowest point total of any of the division winners, 4 wins short of Winnipeg in terms of points. Like 4 wins would get you the extra 8 points. So Winnipeg's numbers are very good, but then you got Dallas at 106, Colorado at 102, Minnesota at 97, St. Louis at 96. Utah had 89. They did fade a little bit late there. Nashville 68 and Chicago 61. So one thing that this division has that none of the others do, they had 2 teams with less than 70 points. For all the negativity around the Pacific Division, and I understand it, I get it, I'm not going to argue that it shouldn't be there. The reality is you had 2 teams that had miserable seasons in the Central Division. And the expectation, I would think, is things will get better this year. But once again, when we get to this side of the board, that's where we get deeper into the discussion. And I'll come back over here and discuss that a little bit. Pacific Division, Vegas wins it with 110 points. 5 points back of them is the Kings. So 2.5 wins off from being division winners. The Oilers, 101 points. Calgary had 96. So 96 points for Calgary, more than both New Jersey and Montreal. And yet, Montreal, there's all kinds of, positivity around the team and expectations of something more. And Calgary, all the discussion is around, is Anderson going to stick around? Does Backlund stick around past the season? Calgary's probably in a little bit of a retool situation, but they still had more points than teams that made the playoffs in the East. It's interesting. Vancouver, 90 points. The Anaheim Ducks, 80 points. Seattle had 76, and San Jose had 52. So San Jose at the bottom of the league, Seattle at 76 points, the same number as both Philadelphia and Boston. So those teams very close to one another. And these numbers end up leading to expectations for this coming season. So proposed contenders. I wanted to look at these teams and say, all right, these are the ones we could argue are contenders. The Washington Capitals coming off of a 111-point season, good goaltending, good defense. Yes, you can make the argument that they're a contender. Thus the question marks on this side of the board. I put a question mark in each one because honestly, you can't have 24 teams in the playoffs, and yet I've got 24 that are between contenders and playoffs on this board. Tampa, despite back-to-back pretty early exits, Tampa, I think, fashions themselves as still being contenders. There's an expectation that they could be aggressive on the trade market this season. Toronto won the division. Toronto, even though Marner's gone, Toronto envisions themselves still as contenders. Carolina coming off of a 99-point season. They've added Nick Ehlers, and I think there's expectations of more points out of them. The Edmonton Oilers, back-to-back Stanley Cup finals. They're contenders, right? Then you've got Vegas. Vegas likely to be the division winner again. Stanley Cup champions in 2023. Even though they have lost back-to-back in early rounds, I don't know that you can count Vegas out. I probably would not at this point. New Jersey, I think, is a team that qualifies as a contender as well. The Florida Panthers, obviously, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, going for 3 in a row this season. The Colorado Avalanche, your 2022 Stanley Cup champions, they still envision themselves as contenders. They were only 4 points behind Dallas during the regular season, so sure, why not? Dallas themselves, 106 points, and Winnipeg, 116 points. I would say all those teams, you can make an argument for them as contenders. But then you get into the playoff question, and honestly, there are going to be some very disappointed fan bases. There's going to be some very excited fan bases. And this is part of what I love with covering hockey on this channel. Montreal unexpectedly made the playoffs this past season. Like I said, 91 points. Probably didn't require the same amount of points they would have in a previous season. The LA Kings coming off of a very impressive 105-point season. But, I mean, in the end, it just came down to a loss against the Oilers. Detroit wants to be in the playoffs. So being under that playoffs header, I think makes sense because they're not in a rebuild anymore. The New York Rangers, they want to bounce back and get back into the playoffs. They only finished, like I said, 6 points out of the playoffs, so we could see that. The Columbus Blue Jackets, only 2 points out of the playoffs. Have Columbus done enough to improve by 3 points? I would say that is possible, and then the question becomes, would they finish higher than either Montreal or New Jersey if they did get 3 more points? And that's a little more difficult to predict. Ottawa made the playoffs for the first time in a very long time. They are already talking a lot about how they want to be in contention and what they want to be able to do in the playoffs. You got the New York Islanders. The Islanders had a down year with 82 points, but there are a lot of Islander fans that are like, hey, we're going to bounce back and be in the mix, and we want to go for that wild card spot. So the Islanders definitely seem to have visions of getting back into the chase. The Anaheim Ducks, they want playoffs. Pat Verbeek has said it. The moves made in the offseason show that this is a team that absolutely wants to play playoff games for the first time in a long time. Vancouver had a down year after winning the division in 2024, and after missing the playoffs in 2025, they are hoping to make up that 6-point difference and end up above the playoff line this next season. Minnesota, amongst all of the talk about Kaprizov and what's going to happen there, the Minnesota Wild, a 97-point team looking to stay above the playoff line. St. Louis finished above the playoff line, winning that tiebreaker with Calgary in terms of, above or below the playoff line. They both had 96 points, and it is a very different story between Calgary and St. Louis as well. So making the playoffs, if you finish above the line, that's what people remember. And so when a goober like me is standing here and going, I think the standings could end up like this year, the answer is going to be, well, how can you do that? Our team made the playoffs, or that team missed the playoffs. How do you have them above the playoff line? Because all these teams are pretty close. Over an 82-game schedule, to have a 6-point difference or 5 or 4-point difference, that's nothing in the grand scheme of things. Boston envisions themselves as bouncing back. I don't know if they will or they won't, but that's what they're aiming for. And Utah is seen as a dark horse to make the playoffs in the West, and I think there's a real chance that does take place. Which brings us to your likely bottom 8, and there will be people who disagree with me on this as well. And I'm not going to say they're wrong, because standings are really difficult to predict. You've got Seattle. Seattle could bounce back. They had a 76-point season, as I previously mentioned, but everything seemed to go wrong for them this past year as well. Nashville, unlikely Nashville bounces back. Nashville's very likely to be near the bottom of the standings. Philadelphia, though they've changed their coach, there's still an expectation that even with Talkett behind the bench and the trades that have been made, they're probably still not a playoff team. Pittsburgh is not expected to push towards a playoff spot, and there's that debate about whether or not they need to, and if they need to push towards playoffs just to entice Crosby to stick around for that much longer. Buffalo doesn't really have any pressure, I don't think. I don't think there's any expectation anyways. But for Buffalo, they do want to make the playoffs. They don't want to be in the bottom 8, but I think that's the expectation. San Jose, obviously still going through a rebuild. Not likely we're going to see San Jose in a playoff spot anytime soon. Calgary did overachieve this past season. That's going to be difficult to repeat because Wolf played fantastic. They didn't get a lot of goals. They didn't get a lot of support offensively, but Wolf was amazing. And then you've got Chicago, still rebuilding. And so one thing to keep in mind is both Chicago and San Jose, the lowest point total teams in the National Hockey League. Chicago 15 points behind the next team in the standings, whereas San Jose finished 9 points behind Chicago. So it does mean that the East is likely to be a little more tough to make it into the playoffs than the West, because you don't have the gimme games that you do against Chicago or San Jose, although that could change this year, couldn't it? San Jose could get a lot better with their young team. Chicago could get a lot better with their young defense. So maybe these also-rans are going to get more into the 76-point plus range this coming season. One of the reasons, though, that I do love covering hockey, one of the reasons that this channel has evolved to where it is because you can make the argument for Detroit over Montreal. You can make the argument for Montreal over Detroit. At this time of year, you can make an argument for a lot of these teams that missed the playoffs to get in, an argument for a lot of the teams that made the playoffs to potentially fall out, and really it is just a matter of, I think a lot of it too, and one thing we cannot predict is injuries. There are teams that miss the playoffs because they go through a swath of just ridiculous injuries, and that is virtually impossible to predict. But I do think this 2025-2026 season will feature excellent parity. I do think we'll see a league where almost anybody can beat almost anybody on any given night. It is in the playoffs that I do believe the parity kind of falls away, just because there are certain teams that seem to be built for the moment in the playoffs and certain teams that struggle to find the energy or the inspiration to make that moment count for themselves in the playoffs. So I do understand that there are a lot of fan bases that believe their team can make the playoffs. That's why I've got so many here under playoffs and contenders, and I think it makes it more interesting to watch hockey, especially in October and early November, because teams that start really slow usually miss the playoffs. Teams that start really fast usually make the playoffs. So that is one thing to keep in mind as we get into October. But I'd be interested to know your ideas and your thoughts regarding which team you think made the playoffs that could fall right off, and which team that missed the playoffs you think could completely jump up. Tampa at some point in time you'd think gravity would take over. Toronto's gone through some major changes. I could see gravity taking over a little bit there. It did feel like Washington overachieved a little bit as well. And then in the underachieved category, the Islanders dealing with the injuries they did. I think Detroit's better than what they produced in terms of points totals. And maybe Vancouver can get back into the playoffs, going from division winner to also ran this past season. They want to get closer to that division winner. I don't know about winning a division, but the playoffs are definitely there. And if we look at this past season, somewhere between 91 and 96 points probably gets you in the playoffs again. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. And yeah, this was just a fun idea I had today to talk about the standings and point out how little difference there really is when you consider it's an 82-game schedule and you're talking about a 7-3 2-point difference over 82 games. Makes it a highly, highly entertaining league to watch, game in and game out, and I'm looking forward to doing that again this season. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Thank you guys so much for all your support, as always, and I will talk to you again soon.